Hello everybody, thanks for checking this out. My name is Jason Horn. This is my YouTube channel Longboxer, where I discuss old comics. I'm a comic book creator, and occasionally I like to talk about comics that inspired me, and today is a great example of that. We're going to be looking at the works of George Pérez. Recently, George said that he has terminal cancer, and so I thought it would be a great chance to dig out all of my George Pérez stuff, which is mostly DC, and just kind of take a look at it, flip through it, and just kind of celebrate his work. I have some Marvel. Actually, it's interesting because when a lot of people think of Perez, they think of maybe Infinity Gauntlet, and this was actually my introduction to the Marvel Universe. I had read very little Marvel before I read Infinity Gauntlet. My first comic book was a Spider-Man comic. The first comic I ever bought was Marvel, but most of my comics throughout the years have been DC's. But we'll take a look at a little bit of Marvel as well. So the big books I think that Perez is known for, obviously Titans, Crisis, Wonder Woman, and probably Infinity Gauntlet, and then eventually JLA Avengers. I also have a little bit of just odds and ends here and there to look at as well. So George's work essentially started in the 70s. He was an assistant to an artist named Rich Buckler, who was the creator of Deathlock, and so after being his assistant for a while, George starts to do a lot of work for Marvel. So some of George's first work was in The Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, which is one of the black and white Kung Fu comics that Marvel was putting out. Marvel was doing a lot of these black and white magazines. They're like full-size magazines, not comic-sized, in black and white. That, I mean, when I think of those, I think of, like gas stations. Like that's where you would see those, even though most of those were a little before my time. But eventually, after working on those black and white magazines, George would go on to be working on more than, I think he was doing like 3 books, or 3 or 4 books at a time at Marvel. He was doing Fantastic Four, Avengers, that Sons of Tiger, and just little odds and ends here and there. He was doing, so when he starts at Marvel, he's doing 3.5 books a month. He was also doing the Inhumans. That's the other book. So he was doing Inhumans, Fantastic Four, Avengers, and the black and white magazines. That's unbelievable. He was penciling a minimum of 5 pages a day, and that's, like I said, starting out. It's amazing to imagine someone, starting out and the pages looked good from the get-go. It's not full-on George Pérez from the beginning. That you always think of his expressions on people's faces, the rubble, and just a ton of characters and stuff like that. So that stuff isn't there exactly right at the jump, but it's pretty close. It's still obviously George Pérez work even in those early days. So first we're going to take a look at his work on the Avengers. So he started with Avengers on issue 141. That was all kind of before my time. I think my first George Pérez comic was actually a random issue of Avengers, but I didn't know anything about the Avengers. I don't remember where I got that comic. Just one of those comics you get eventually when you're collecting back in the day. So this I just picked up at the library. I don't even think I have that original Avengers issue anymore. I haven't gotten rid of many of my comics, but I got rid of that somewhere along the way. So this is one of those old collections that just have a ton of issues in it, and they'd be in black and white, which is pretty cool. I kind of wish they would still do stuff like this, like a cheap way to get a ton of older back issues. And so, like I said, Perez comes on at like issue 141. So he's been at it a while. Once we get to this stuff, and you can see here. So this is like clearly like George Pérez tech, lots of characters, and he wanted to do, like, from early on, wanted to do these team books where there would be tons of characters. Back then, before there were royalties and stuff, because the team books would sell better. So if there had been royalties, you would have been paid more on a team book. But back then, before that, they were all paid the same. So, like, if you're drawing, Captain America, you would be making the same. You're, drawing one character in Captain America, you'd be making the same as drawing all of these characters in the Avengers. So most of the artists didn't want to do these team books. They were like the worst assignments back then. But that's exactly what George wanted. It's so impressive. One of the issues I wanted to talk about specifically is an issue that I think George Pérez does not like, and I can imagine why, because it's crazy. It's issue 200, which is like their anniversary issue. If you know, then you know. You know why I'm about to talk about this. It's just off the hinges. So this is it. This is the issue 200. I wasn't familiar with this story until recently. Essentially, I'll try to explain it. It's so complicated and crazy. So Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, like the issue before, finds out that she's pregnant, doesn't know why, just out of nowhere she's pregnant. She has the baby in this issue, this anniversary. You would think Avengers 200, big anniversary issue, it would be like some great story. It's maybe the craziest Avengers story I've ever heard of. A lot of people can't draw kids very well, especially little babies, but this is pretty good. So she has the baby. The baby starts like aging rapidly, starts growing up immediately, and the Avengers starts like having to fight all these dinosaurs and things like that, because I think like time is broken. So the baby grows up, and then she like falls in love with her baby, but then like the baby's not her real baby. The baby's the father of the baby. It's crazy. So essentially, this guy, the baby that she has who grows up, he's the Immortus's son. I don't know if you're familiar with the Immortus. I'm not super familiar. I think it's all time travel, Kang related stuff. So this is the Immortus. So this guy is his son, and he was like trapped in this time dimension, and he's trying to find a way out of it. And he chooses Carol Danvers to give birth to him. So he kind of like tricks her into becoming pregnant, and she gives birth to him himself. And so he's able to then leave this pocket dimension in time, and is birthed as this baby. And then, so they're all like mad at him for doing all this, but then she's like kind of in love with him and goes off with him at the end, like leaves the Avengers. It's a crazy story. Anyways, that's one of the many issues that George Pérez drew. That's a crazy one. So I'm not super familiar with a ton of his Avengers work, other than like some of the stuff I've read in here. But the Avengers is one of the main things he's known for early on. But then what he wanted to do was, and he accomplishes it pretty early. He starts working for both Marvel and DC, which is pretty impressive. Not something that a lot of people, could do back then easily. So he starts going back and forth, but his main goal is to, I think, do the Avengers and do Justice League of America at the same time, which is unbelievable. So quickly he jumps over to start doing issues of Justice League of America, and I have some of those. So it's 1980. And George Pérez has come to DC. His main goal, essentially, was to get to draw Justice League. That's why he wanted to come to DC, was to get a chance to do Justice League. And so, as they're preparing, George, like finding what he could do for Justice League, this terrible thing happens. So Dick Dillon is the artist here on Justice League, and he passes away suddenly of a heart attack. So this is his last issue, and this is one of the issues where it's like that yearly crossover between the Justice Society and the Justice League. They used to do that every year. But also, the cool thing, kind of cool, is that this is like the first big introduction of Kirby's New Gods stuff to the mainstream DC universe. There's been like a few things here and there, like a few crossovers have already happened. Like obviously, like it always kind of was a crossover because Superman was always kind of in the mix with them. But this is the first time that they're kind of, everyone is kind of meeting the New Gods. I think. But the bad thing is, this terrible Orion costume. It's just a travesty. Out of all the weird Orion costumes, including like the weird Super Friends action figure that Kirby himself designed, like this is definitely the worst one. So this is the end of Dick Dillon's run. But after this issue, I mean, it's pretty good. That's a pretty good Dark Side, considering. It's good. You know, you can definitely see the Kirby stuff. So after that issue, we get to George Pérez's run. So this issue is dated November 1980, which is actually the same, I think the same date as the first appearance of Teen Titans, which I'll get to here in a second. But so this is George Pérez's first big DC work, written by Gary, is it Jerry Conway? Gary Conway? Either way, that dude wrote the first comic I ever bought. He wrote that Spider-Man comic that I bought the first time I ever bought a comic book. This story's pretty good, considering like a lot of those. So this is like predates Hunger Dogs, when Kirby returns to the New Gods, and he just kind of ignores all this stuff, you know, which is to be expected, I guess. But I mean, look at it, like this. I mean, this is so early. It's so early in Perez's work, and look at that page. It's obviously, you know, Perez. It's everything. He would do these like Kirby dots that like they're obviously like Kirby dots stuff, but they're kind of like look like his own version of it almost, if that's a thing. It's just amazing that he kind of was what he was. Not the faces aren't exactly, you know, Perez faces from the get-go, but a lot of the background works are really good. Now see, this says that Frank McLaughlin is also an artist. I wonder if he was just the inker or if he also penciled and inked as well. I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't think Perez inked this. I'm not sure exactly though. That's pretty cool. So that's Highfather. The story, it's been a while since I've read this. I just remember, I think it ends with Darkseid being dead, which like lasts like 2 seconds. Let's check out the next issue. So this is December 1980, and I think that might be the date of Teen Titans 1. But let's close out this couple of Justice League issues first. I mean, right away he's doing the George Pérez thing where there's like 100 characters on a 2-page spread, you know. Again, like super early on in his career, and he's already doing this. Darkseid with a cape, you know. Other than like the superpowers figure, that's not something you see, and this predates that. That's kind of interesting. I don't remember all the storyline in this. I remember liking some of it, and the writer of this would go on to. He's the one who's written a lot of the post Kirby. Like he wrote the Return of the New Gods stuff. So a lot of the post Kirby New Gods stuff was written by him, and it's pretty good considering it's not Kirby. I actually like some of that stuff. It's not bad. So I think this ends. I think it just ends with Darkseid being like torn to shreds or something, and he's just dead, but he's not really dead. But that's the end of that. So this is early beautiful George Pérez work.
Alright, just wanted to jump in real quick to tell you about my comic book, Settle, which you can read on my Patreon. It's $1 a month to get full access to the comic book. And so Settle is a sci-fi comic about robot farmers, but it's about a man who is kind of dealing with some unresolved grief from his past, and it kind of causes him to reevaluate his beliefs. So if that sounds interesting to you, there's a link down in the description below. You can check it out at patreon.com/JasonHorn, and I would greatly appreciate it. Big shout out to all my supporters. If you're watching this, thank you. You guys don't know how much it means to me. I appreciate your support. Back to George Pérez.
Alright, so now let's get to pretty much the main part of his early career, which is going to be New Teen Titans. So they first appear in this preview in DC Comics Presents 26. This first story is also written by Marv Wolfman. So all the Titan stuff is going to be written by Marv Wolfman. They had first collaborated at Marvel in an annual for Fantastic Four. I can't remember what number, but so this is their first appearance. So this is the first appearance of Cyborg, Starfire, Raven. I think that's right. I think the other ones had all appeared. So Perez only agreed to do this run on New Teen Titans if he was allowed to do the Justice League. He didn't. So Perez did not think that anything was going to happen with this Teen Titans. He thought it was going to get canceled after just like 2 or 3 issues, which is hilarious because it goes on, to be the biggest success of his career, I think, and kind of immediately, and like right away, it's like it all looks exactly, what you would expect. So the story in here is its own story. It's not just like a few pages from the first issue of New Teen Titans. And the thing I didn't know, when I first heard about New Teen Titans, I didn't even know that they were relaunching, from this old Teen Titans book. I'd never heard of this, the older Teen Titans book. I only knew of the New Teen Titans, even though it says new in the title, so maybe that should have been a pretty clear indication that they were rebooting this, but I had no idea of that. So this story is its own story. It winds up being like kind of like a weird dream that Robin has, like at the end. He's just kind of like, was that all a dream? And it was like, it has to do with like Raven was like either like showing him the future or getting into his head or something. So I think this is like the thing where like you can see people's, not all the time, like when it's smaller you can't, but like the thing that Perez does where you can see their eyeballs like inside their masks. It just makes them look like real people. It makes them seem so real in a way. Like he does the expressions that he's kind of known for that makes them all seem like real individual people where the faces don't all look the same. But he also does like this where like the masks just look so real the way he draws them. Okay, so now getting to New Teen Titans, the book that essentially makes George Pérez who he is in the eyes of I was going to say DC readers, but pretty much just all readers, all comics readers. We get to the New Teen Titans. So this was probably the first time I really became aware of his work. I was like 2 years old when this came out, but I saw later, I saw like one of these, there used to be these like 4 packs of comics that I would pick up at Walmart that had these cards on them. And one of the cards, sometimes they would have covers. And one of the covers they had on one of these that I picked up was the cover for New Teen Titans. And that's essentially how I found out about the New Teen Titans. I saw that card that had this cover on it, and I told my mom, please go to bookstores, and because that's the only way I could really find comics at the time. Go to a bookstore, look for this cover, memorize this cover. Please look for it. I have to find it. It's a team that is led by Robin. So please find this book. She went, this was years out. This was like, into the 80s, probably like 84, 85 at least, maybe even 86. I don't know. So of course she wasn't just going to find this on the newsstand at a bookstore. So she looked, but she tried. I remember being very annoyed. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry how annoyed I was that they didn't have this. It wasn't your fault. So 1980, New Teen Titans comes out. It had the preview in DC Comics Presents, and this essentially picks up where that left off. It even kind of addresses the Robin having that vision, and so it starts with this one of these things that like Perez is kind of known for, these kind of like wow images, like a splash page where there's just so much detail. I mean, just right off the bat, that's what we're given on the first page. It's pretty amazing, and this kind of super detailed, crazy spaceship. So also right off the bat, we're getting the characters that Marv Wolfman and George Pérez created: Starfire, Raven, and then in a bit, Cyborg. So it's a pretty buff Robin here. So one of the things that I discovered in doing research for this was that Marv and George were the ones who wanted Dick Grayson to essentially kind of progress I assumed that because they're the ones who created Nightwing essentially, but I didn't know that they were the ones who pitched to DC to have a new Robin in Jason Todd. Well, I'm sure someone else maybe later the Batman writers came up with the Jason Todd name, but they were the ones who, at the very least, came up with the idea of having a new Robin, so that in Teen Titans, Dick could become Nightwing eventually. I'm not sure like how into the series that plan was hatched, but that's how it came about. That's how Jason Todd. So if you're one of those Jason Todd fans or Jason Todd haters, it started with Marv Wolfman and George Pérez on this book, and maybe even Lynn Wein. So Lynn Wein is the editor of the book. Lynn Wein is the editor. Most likely known, you know him as the creator of like Swamp Thing, or co-creator of Swamp Thing, Wolverine, that kind of stuff. So he's the editor on the book in the beginning. So eventually, one of the other things I learned is that Lynn Wein becomes too, I think that's how you pronounce his name, Lynn Wein. He becomes too busy with editorial stuff and doesn't have time to edit Titans anymore. And Marv Wolfman begins editing Titans himself. And then eventually so Marv Wolfman and George Pérez live pretty close to each other, and they start hanging out at a restaurant like once a week, hatching out the plot together. And so eventually Perez is also plotting while in the beginning, so he's co-plotting. And before like DC could work it all out, Marv Wolfman is paying George Pérez the fee of co-editing or co-plotting at first. I thought that was crazy that he paid him out of his own pocket until like DC could work it all out. Pretty amazing. And then eventually Perez is also co-editing the book. So I can't imagine a book that's more the product of the creators than a book that is written and illustrated by the writers and the editors of the book. That's what Titans becomes. And in Titans, I'd always heard how, well it did, like how popular it was and how well it sold. But at its height, New Teen Titans sold 3 times more than any other book. So more than Batman. So Batman was their best-selling book at the time. And this eventually was selling 3 times what Batman was selling for. The sales numbers, it's crazy. I didn't know it was that popular. I knew it was their number 1 book, I guess, but I didn't know it sold that much over Batman. It's unbelievable. I didn't know the gap was that wide between. So so this is the character, one of the characters they created, Cyborg. Huge character now. One of the main, focus of like big member of the Justice League now and stuff. When I'd never really thought about it, but I saw an interview where Perez was talking about one of his influences for designing Cyborg was Deathlock, which, going back to his roots of where he got started at Marvel, working with the co-creator of Deathlock, that was one of the inspirations visually for Cyborg. And when I think of this original design of Cyborg, I think of the Superpowers figure. So this was huge for me because this was the last figure that I needed to complete my Superpowers collection, which is I think the only action figure line that I have all of them. He is very expensive because he was one of the last figures created. So this is, and it's back metal and just looks beautiful. So that's what I think of when I see these original issues. When I see Cyborg, I think of this amazing figure that cost me way too much. But so the story, essentially like Raven's getting them all together, like they're all meeting each other. Like Flash and Wonder Girl and Robin all knew each other from their previous Titans outings. This is I did not remember Wonder Girl's kind of origin story, and I'll talk more about that later because that's one of the issues that Perez really likes to talk about. That was huge for him at the time. It's kind of her origin. But so they're all meeting, and Raven is just putting them all together, and you don't know why for a while because Marv was like planting the seeds for, you know, like they're Raven is bringing them together for some big threat, but you don't know what that is at first. But at first they're just kind of saving Starfire from these alien slave traders or something. And so they're all meeting the new people, coming together, fighting, becoming a team for the first time, and saving Starfire, who still can't speak English at all until she, I think in the next issue, she kisses. That's something I didn't remember from reading this back in the day. I remember I saw it in the X-Men Titans crossover when she kisses somebody, then she can like speak their language or something. So that's something she does, I think, in the next issue where she kisses Robin again, like right away, getting them two together. So it like, but anyway, so Raven getting the team all together and like planting the seeds for you know, the reason that they're all together in her mind is to fight her father. Eventually, I can't even remember what issue that is. I probably have it. I have a bunch of them. I don't have all of the Perez issues. That's one thing I'm trying to complete now. I have actually the big ones, like this one especially, not a cheap book. I got that pretty cheap though. I think maybe no more than $5 is what I paid for that. But so the thing about the new Teen Titans that's kind of cool that I was thinking about is that they are these established, or at least they're in the shadow of these established characters. They're the sidekicks who are coming of age, figuring out who they are, and also just like figuring out who they are in the shadow of their parent figures, of their, you know, the superheroes that they're the sidekicks of. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons that it resonated, because like, you know, it's always kind of compared to the X-Men, because the X-Men were like supposed to be like, you know, teenagers. At first they were, but I feel like the X-Men like grew up really quick, whereas, you know, the Titans were like teenagers, maybe teenagers for too long, but like they were like in the 80s, they were like actually teenagers. I feel like Raven doesn't look like a teenager sometimes, but anyway, like they're figuring out who they are in relation to their parental figures, and maybe that's one of the things that clicked with readers at the time in the 80s, especially, you know, like teenage readers and stuff. So this is like one of the issues where they finally like really like show, you get to see like Perez doing the Titans and the Justice League at least a little bit. So this is her father. I guess they've gotten into the Trigon stuff. And just still, like, so as far as his art goes, like, he would do interesting layouts like this, which was, there's a lot of this type of stuff in Crisis as well, and some of the other, like, DC books that are not long after this, that just look super awesome. So there's, like, you know, like I said, like, literally dealing with who, their parental figures. I think that's a big part of the book. The other thing that's kind of cool is, like, so if you get out, like when George like went to get on Avengers or Fantastic Four, like those were established things, and the Titans, like I said, had been a book before, but this is more of like I was saying, like their whole team creating the success of it. So if Fantastic Four started selling really well, it wouldn't be that much of a shock, but to create this book, not from scratch, but like close to it, like half the team is totally new. But to get it to the level of success that it had is pretty astounding for something that they built from the ground up for the most part. And so you can definitely like see that the success that it has is because of what they built, not like a big built-in audience that it already had. And by the time they got to this, a few years in, they're debuting the Vigilante, which of course has kind of become a little popular now because of the Peacemaker show, which is surprisingly good. I dug it. Definitely a different kind of a feel than most things. So there's a lot of dense storytelling going on in this issue, man. That's a lot of words. So at this point, like I said, the writer and co-plotters and layouts, so they're getting like, it's not just like George Pérez is on art here. We're getting, not editing yet, because Len Wein is still editing by this, but we're getting like more credits, which is it's pretty impressive. So now I guess I should talk a little bit about Terra. A lot of people, you know, the big Judas Contract is probably like one of the biggest things that this run was kind of known for. And I was reading that they originally like were creating Terra as this character that was kind of like, you know, visually like an innocent young girl to be kind of similar to Kitty Pryde in the X-Men. And they were trying to make you think that, like, she was really good, and, you know, at no point maybe I've always known, you know, I didn't read this back in the day, so I've always thought of her as this, you know, the girl that was going to portray them. It must have been so different and interesting to not have known that and to have been just shocked and surprised when the Judas contract came. So at some point, like, once this is full on, New Teen Titans is the most popular book at DC, Perez can kind of just do whatever he wants. He's given the option to leave Titans and do what he had originally intended, to draw Justice League. And one of the shocking things to me is he didn't do it. He wanted to continue building this successful book. It wasn't just like, I think, you know, eventually he does leave and wants to do more, but, you know, it's pretty popular right away. So one of the other things that's kind of interesting is the royalty situation. So at the time, I think when they launched, maybe DC royalties were not even really a thing yet, but pretty early on it does become a thing. But there's like a threshold, for like a sales threshold, before those royalties would kick in. And so Titans is the only book at DC at this time that was selling enough for the creators to get royalties. And I don't know the exact numbers, but from the research I did, the royalties must have been pretty sweet because the way Perez would talk about it in interviews, even contemporary at the time, in the 80s, the interviews, like, he was making a fortune, which is crazy because it's still early on in his career here, to have gotten, you know, that, to be doing like the #1 book when he's still relatively new, like, that's pretty astonishing. I can't imagine like what that does, what that does to your like the outlook of your career, to all of it. It's just and to be able to just do anything with the entire universe, which is what he wanted. He just, you know, always wanted to throw the kitchen sink and draw a bunch of dudes. That was what he always wanted to do. And so, you know, after this he gets to do Crisis, so that's kind of like where this eventually leads as far as the wanting to draw all the characters in the DC universe. But he sticks with Titans for a while, which is super interesting. And Marv sticks with Titans a really long while. He writes the book for years and years. But anyway, Vigilante, that's kind of spoilers. That's Vigilante, in case you've never read this. The Vigilante in Peacemaker, very, very different than this Vigilante. But he's one of the funnest things about that show, in my opinion. One of the things that I know George Pérez wasn't super happy about was just the printing quality, and I'll talk more about that when we look at when the series is starting to be printed on the Baxter paper. They kind of relaunch the series. The numbering of all that gets confusing to me still, because I think it like turns into Tales of Teen Titans. It like splits into 2 books or something. It's confusing. But there's a Baxter paper series, which I've talked a little bit about the Baxter paper stuff in the New Gods series that I did, because they were reprinted on that thicker Baxter paper where it's like not normal comic printing, it's like real 4-color process printing where it looks much nicer. And that's the thing that Perez was like wanting for so long, because I think he even had a huge issue with the first issue of Crisis. I'll talk more about that when we get to it. Well, that's pretty crazy. Oh, it's like a insert for Ronin. That's cool. I didn't remember this. Ronin's an interesting series by Frank Miller. If you've never read it, that's cool that it had like a full color gatefold like poster thing. Anyway, back to Titans. So, like I said, this is like, I think like a little bit right before Tara like betrays them. So she's like the sister of Geoforce from The Outsiders. Speaking of Baxter paper, that was some of the other books that were done on that Baxter paper, was like The Outsiders, and I think Omega Men. Maybe Omega Men was the first one done on the Baxter paper. But anyway, it's just like a nicer printing process. And I think George was, even though that's what he, like I said, he was wanting it to be printed nicer, I think he also had issues with it. That's kind of cool for old school comic printing. That's actually kind of an interesting effect. You don't normally see that kind of stuff. But with that Baxter paper stuff, it's like full bleed, you know, all that kind of stuff you could do. But I think he still wasn't even happy with it. I was talking a little bit about Tara earlier, so this is the issue that introduces her. And I think it's kind of funny that she has these powers that kind of controls like earth and like rubble and stuff, because these textures, like all these little like pieces of rubble and earth, that's like what I think of a lot of times when I think of George Pérez art. Look at this architecture. Oh, good gracious. And that's just like, it's not even like, this isn't a splash page. This is just one panel, like this amount of architectural detail, these windows in just this one little panel, the amount of detail there is crazy. And all this tech stuff too. His tech is so distinctive, like almost as distinctive as Kirby, not quite as much, because the Kirby you can spot a mile away. But like, you show me some tech and I'll probably be able to pick out the George Pérez tech. So this is the Brotherhood of Evil, one of the big Titans foes over the years. I'm not actually super familiar with them. I haven't read a ton of the issues with them in it. But like I said, like all these little, like a million little rocks. The comic I'm drawing now, like I just got through drawing a bunch of rocks, which was fine drawing them, but like coloring them is kind of a nightmare. Let me see like what are the credits at this? I'm kind of jumping around with the issues here. This is number 28. So this is 1982. And so like here they're being credited as both writer, co-creators, artist. So that's kind of like a neat little like banner to give them both credit. So she eventually joins the Titans, and that stuff doesn't go well. It's kind of her character being as young as she was, and then having a relationship with Deathstroke. That stuff's that's a bit dicey, but I try to not think about that and think about the amazing art instead. I didn't remember their letter column being called Titan's Tower. That's kind of cool. I'm not sure at what point the tower is introduced. I'm gonna have to look that up. This is the issue. One of the issues that I read that George was talking about that was kind of interesting, that he was super proud of, because at the time it was kind of unheard of. Like this intro is already like a little different. It's kind of like a noir kind of a like introduction here, like a noir opening of a noir film or something. But then that's kind of what the issue is. It's like a detective issue where Robin gets to like kind of dig into her Wonder Girl's past and try to figure out, because she doesn't really remember where she comes from and who her parents are, because she was just kind of found in a fire when she was a baby, and Wonder Woman saved her, and Wonder Woman took her to Paradise Island, and kind of somehow gave her her powers. I'm not sure how that works, but again, like with these like crazy detail in just a small little panel, it's unbelievable. Like you would think that would be like the size of the entire page. But anyway, so I didn't really remember a ton about her character. She's really fleshed out a lot. So she like gets into a relationship with this dude, and they get married eventually. Like these characters really grow over time, where a lot of comics are just kind of stagnant. Because like I said, like even Robin, like they had plans, to progress all these characters in a way that you don't get in a lot of books, especially at the time. And they progressed as a family. They weren't just characters that that just grew up really quick, or like it was really fleshed out over time, and it was all intentional. It's all the storytelling progression stuff was just intentional. Anyway, getting back to this issue, one of the things that Perez was proud of in this issue was that there's no big fight. It's just detective work. There's like no big fight scene where they're punching 1,000 dudes. It's literally just him doing some real detective work and figuring out who her mother is, and that's the issue. There's no fight in this whole issue, and he was just saying how proud he was. So I didn't have this until recently. I picked it up because he was talking about it, and it sounded interesting and different. And then it just kind of ends as it began. But yeah, that's a cool issue. So now we'll talk about this issue. So this began the Baxter Paper series. Like I was talking, it's like, as you can see, like immediately the paper is different. This full bleed. It was a direct market. So at this point, there's a direct market. So this is the year, let me look, 84. So there's a direct market at this point, which means like comic stores. So it's not just being sold on newsstands. It's actually being sold directly. I think you could only get this. It costs more too. It's like $1.25 as opposed to like 75 cents. It's a big difference. but you're like paying for this quality. And I think Perez thought the colors were very kind of like oversaturated. And maybe that was fixed over time as the series progressed. But yeah, the colors are very saturated. It kind of like really pops when you're used to seeing stuff on, you know, kind of tan newsprint. When it's this like super thicker, nicer white paper that you do these like color holds, like this kind of stuff, like this white outline. And Jericho's another thing I haven't really talked about yet. So this is another character that they created, and his kind of effect of like leaving his body and having this white outline like that. I'm not sure if, how that was pulled off in the newsprint stuff, but definitely does a lot better here. Like you could do these like full bleed, like dark black backgrounds. Just a lot of stuff you couldn't do in the other format. I wonder at the time, did people care, you know, like paying that much more for the comic, did people even, like kids, did they even notice? I could, like, some of the colors on this are kind of crazy, but it still looks great. His detail in the artwork is preserved better. Like you can see it better. See, like when it's how weird Raven looks sometimes to me. Like that's not a teenager. I don't know that's my only issue with all the artwork in Titans. It's all amazing, but Raven starts to look a little weird to me. Like this stuff, that's not the kind of stuff that would look good. Like you could do it on newsprint, not the full bleed, but you could do that effect but there's no way it looks this good. Like golly, all these bodies. That's just astonishing. Yeah, and Trigon, just the printing quality is really different and cool. And I remember hearing that like this was a controversy, that they were in bed together, looking pretty naked too. Definitely not just kids comics. I mean, it's all right. There's like a literal like devil guy melting a face off over here. So this is no longer just like, comic for kids. This is for the teenagers that are growing up at this time. I'm sure they loved it. It probably felt like, like not your dad's or your grandpa's comics. So anyway, so they relaunched, this is New Teen Titans, and I think Tales of Teen Titans was also going on at the same time. So I guess that one you could get maybe on the newsstand, and this was for direct market only. I guess that's why it doesn't have like a UPC either. I assume. So like this would be direct market as well, but there'd be a newsstand version that would have like the UPC. But this one doesn't even have like a box for it. That was probably cool too. Just being able to do a cover without having to worry about worrying about the stupid UPC box. And I know George Pérez had talked a lot in the interviews I read about getting to do his own covers, like because he started becoming known as like someone to seek out to do covers. When you're doing stuff like this, it's not surprising. And so the next thing one of the things I want to talk about next is like some of the odds and ends other comics that he worked on. This is like one of the big issues where they quit their old personas and he becomes Nightwing, and then he just becomes the Flash, because this is getting close to Crisis when Barry Allen will be gone soon, and I'll get to that soon as well. But for now, I want to talk about the odds and ends books. All right, so before I even get to these, one of the things I want to talk about was the legendary crossover X-Men and Teen Titans. So Perez was going to draw this, but he actually at the time started the Justice League Avengers crossover, because eventually that's going to become JLA Avengers 20 years later or whatever. But he'd started that and had worked on like 20 pages of the crossover, so that's why he didn't get to work on this. But as some of you might know, like that ill-fated original attempt to do the Justice League Avengers, it actually like fell apart, mostly because Marvel just wasn't happy with the story. Like Jim Shooter like shut it all down, and Marv wasn't supposed to be drawing it yet, so he kind of got the go-ahead from DC before Marvel okayed it, and he was like 20 pages in before it got shot down. So anyway, that's why he didn't draw this. This art is amazing. So it's Simonson, so it's beautiful, and it's like Simonson doing like Darkseid. Like that alone is fantastic. But you get like the X-Men, Phoenix, the Titans. It's an awesome book. But Perez didn't draw it, so let's look at something he did draw. This is like a random issue of DC Comics Presents with OMAC, which that's pretty great. I just saw the cover, and I was like, well, that's got to be Perez. But surely he didn't do interiors, but he does. So it's written by the editor of Titans, Lynn Wein, This is like 83, so it's a few years into Titans. I have no idea like why he just drew this random issue. Like, does he not have enough going on with Titans, and no telling what else he was doing? But he starts, this is like a year maybe before he starts even on Crisis. So he's got a lot getting ready. But he just does. It's a pretty good issue. So it's like a time travel story with of course they Superman and OMAC fight, and then they team up. Some really good stuff. I'm a big OMAC fan. Like, if you haven't read Kirby's initial OMAC stuff, can't recommend it enough. But seeing Perez, go to town on this issue is pretty cool. Like I said, I don't know like why this happened, but like, look at this. Look at that. Like, it could have been anything. It could have been like a flat undercarriage of this train, but look at this amount of detail. Like, that's the kind of thing that he just wants to draw so much stuff, and it just looks so good. It's crazy. So this is that random issue of DC Comics Presents, but he also did a bit. It's like it says plus the new Teen Titans. So I imagine, I haven't actually looked at this yet, but I've had it for a while. But let's see. So yeah, special Teen Titans cameo by Marv Wolfman and George Pérez. Writer, co-creators, artist. That's an interesting. So is it like part of the story, or is it a separate story? Let's find out. No way, it's just like the Titans show up and that part is just drawn by him? Okay, so it's just like a separate chapter of the story. It's just like a straight up Titans comic in the middle of this. So this is Terra era, like pre-Jericho, but with Terra. Is that all? Is it just these pages? I'm finding this out as we go here, because I didn't actually take a look at this yet. Let's just keep flipping through it. So it's like everybody's here. It's the Outsiders, Justice League, World's Finest. It's got a lot going on. This must have been like, oh, it's got a bunch of different artists, I guess. I like Mark Texeria. Let's see if is that all the Perez, or is there more? Whoa. Don't know what's going on here, but it looks interesting. I don't know who this crazy looking dude is. He looks like a crazy action figure. I guess that's all the George Pérez there was. Maybe. I don't know. Interesting book. Couple of pages. Maybe that's how he had the time. Anyways, there's that. I think is this the first appearance of her? I can't remember. So one of the other things, I'll talk about, this is just kind of brief kind of a thing. This one's super interesting. So we're getting towards this one, maybe just jumping ahead a little bit. So this is 86, where he is inking like one of his like heroes. He's inking Kurt Swan on like this one of those last issues of Superman right before Crisis. That's written by Alan Moore. So this is like a huge, well-known storyline. But did you know that Perez is the inker here? And you can really see, like, definitely, like, looks. I don't remember ever paying attention to that aspect of it, because I was probably just wrapped up in, like, oh, this is Alan Moore's Superman story thing. But not really realizing the effect that Perez had on it. And you can definitely see it in points. It does not look like Kurt Swan exactly, so it makes sense that. I want to know, because what I saw was that he was inking. See, like, that's not like a George Pérez Superman. It's definitely an amalgamation, so maybe it was just him inking it. I wonder if he did anything else. I'm not sure if he did layouts or if he just inked. I'm not sure. But it's just, so this is like a 2-issue thing. There's like a Superman issue and a action issue, but I think Perez only worked on this issue. So it's cool to get to see. Dude's got to be like working on Crisis at this point, or in the middle of it. Like, this is 86. Maybe it just, I don't remember. I don't remember the timing of it, but like, he's got to be busy is what I'm thinking. So like, this is a super like iconic splash page that I wouldn't have thought of probably as a Perez page, but he at the very least inked it. So that's cool. And this I'm gonna just take a quick look at because Perez designed. So this is the redesign of Brainiac and Lex Luthor, probably most well known because of the action figure. I wonder if he got royalties for this design from the action figures, because I know like they got Kirby to redesign some of the new gods so that he could get royalties, but I wonder if Perez got royalties off of this figure too. I'm not sure. I've never heard. So I thought Perez also did redesign the Brainiac from this, but he didn't. And I don't think he does the art in this issue. Yeah, this is like Kurt Swan. But there is like that. Just a second. It's like so this is Perez talking about designed by Perez. So this pinup shows the new costume that he designed. And like I said, I thought he did the Brainiac, but it was somebody else. Yeah, so this is Ed Hannigan, which I'm not familiar with that name. But this is a really good drawing, though. That Brainiac is awesome. I've always loved it. But Perez did the Luthor. So that's just some kind of odds and ends. Okay, so now we are at probably one of the things he's most known for, Perez drawing Crisis on Infinite Earths. The name alone actually comes from George Pérez. He was the one who came up with the word crisis, which is, not only does this start like all the big crossover event books in DC, but it starts the Crisis, which is, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, all that. Starts here in format. Like, this is the first big DC crossover. So they've done like, things where they'd crossed over like the worlds from like, the Earth 2 and Earth 1 have done plenty of crossovers, but there's never been like a company-wide crossover until this book. It was announced in like 81, I think, but didn't start coming out till like 85. So they had a lot of time to work up to it, I think. I mean, I guess they started working on this like soon after Titans was launched and becoming popular. So let's crack it open, take a look. So Secret Wars had already come out, but this is, like I said, this is the first time we got to see this at DC. Crisis Mail. That's kind of funny. So it literally begins, this like the Bible, or like the birth of the universe, or the birth of the multiverse in this case, showing the literal beginning of the universe, and it introduces this new character, Pariah, which I've never really cared for him. He always seemed kind of, silly. I don't know. He's okay, but he's not. When I think of Crisis, I don't think of that dude. I think probably more than anything, I think of like, Supergirl dying or Flash dying. We'll talk more about that when I get to it. So it begins on showing some of these alternate Earths, and on this Earth, this is where Lex Luthor is like the only hero, and he sends like his son through the multiverse, kind of like mirroring the Superman being sent to Earth. He sends him as a baby throughout the multiverse, and his son plays a big role in this. And so I'd read somewhere like George Pérez like picked up this first issue and was completely disappointed in the printing of it, and immediately like called up Dick Giordano and tried to like work out how to print. I don't see any issues. I mean, I think it's just because this is what I expect from newsprint comics. So I wonder, like, I guess maybe the Baxter paper stuff hadn't come out at this point, so it's kind of surprising that they didn't do this on better paper with better, because it's like the big like 50th anniversary celebration kind of a thing, as you can see here. So like I said, they started thinking about it in like the early 80s, but they knew so much was going to go into it that they waited till the 50th anniversary. So this is Harbinger. Yeah, so she's around. She pops up in a lot of the crossovers and stuff. But and she actually sticks around in the DC universe for a while. So, and she's like working with the Monitor, who's been like watching over all these heroes. And Marv had originally named the Monitor was going to be the Librarian, because he was like finding out all this information about all the heroes and stuff like. But at some point, I don't know if it's going to be like the anti-Librarian when the bad guy comes in. I don't know if that was ever the plan. But anyway, you get to see like Blue Beetle, so the Charlton characters get introduced in here. So all the stuff that DC had acquired along the way, the Shazam stuff, Charlton characters, stuff like that, that the purpose of this series is to cram them all into one, plus all the old stuff like the JSA and the Freedom Fighters and all that junk. It can be all compressed into one. As far as George's artwork, I mean, I could definitely see some like maybe color slippage or something, but it looks pretty good. Anyway, as far as George's artwork goes, amazing. He wanted this. He wanted to draw all the characters in the DC universe. It's like a lifelong dream of his. I read an interview where he said, like, he couldn't sleep at night because he would not want to leave the drawing table. Like, that's how into this isn't just like this isn't just something he's good at. This was like something he was born ready to do and wanting his entire life. So it's really cool. I can't fathom not being able to sleep at night because I want to draw more. I mean, I guess, I don't know. I could see that to a degree, but not if I had to draw all this stuff, I would pick sleep over this. This is so much stuff to draw in this. I don't see how it's even possible. But not only is it possible for Perez, it's what he wanted more than anything. And it has these awesome, wraparound covers that they kind of remind me of the Who's Who stuff, the covers that he did, that we can talk about a little later, where it's like these just tons of characters like all in one space doing stuff together. So let's look at more of the issues. So these two issues, probably the most iconic issues of the series, because these are the things that had the most lasting impact, I guess, on most readers. So it's death of Barry Allen, death of Supergirl, and so Supergirl, it seems like they were kind of maybe told to kill off both of these characters by editorial. Flash definitely, from what I read, they were told to kill him. And Superman, they just wanted him to be, they felt like there's too many Kryptonians running around, so they killed her. Both of them come back eventually, of course. But it seemed like Flash was more, they were told, and then Supergirl, it seems like Marv was maybe heading that direction anyways. So this is issue 7. All the heroes have, come together, and oh wow, this has got the that bad costume. The thing is, like, looking at like what version is Black Canary at this point? What costume was Supergirl wearing? That stuff's interesting. So they're meeting the Shazam people, fighting with them. Charlton characters again. It's and the Freedom Fighters. So at this point, it's writer and editor Marv Wolfman, but this is another one of those cases where George Pérez becomes the editor on this book as well, like they did with Titans. So you've got all this like messy continuity of DC over the years, and they're attempting to clean it up. But to me, I didn't know, a ton of that messy, 50-year history stuff. So to me, this was like an introduction. I didn't read this till later. I wasn't reading this when it came out at all. I didn't read it till like the late 90s. But it was kind of like the Infinity Gauntlet, which we'll talk about maybe in part 2, because I think I'm going to split this up into 2 parts, because these videos are going to get long if I talk about all my Perez comics. But like Infinity Gauntlet, I didn't know the entire universe that well. I knew the main people. Like in this, like I know Batman, I know Superman, I know of one, the Super Friends cartoon. I have some idea, but like the Freedom Fighters, I have no idea who those dudes are. So it was kind of like a good introduction. Like, even though I didn't really understand what was going on that much, this is how like I kind of figured out some of that stuff. Pre-internet, pre-Wikipedia. This is like these huge miniseries were like how you would figure that stuff out, which is kind of a cool part of it. And I know one of the issues that Wolfman had as the writer and editor on this book was trying to deal with getting all the other writers of all the other series on board, which I think is, the normal kind of problem you would have with these big company-wide crossovers, trying to have all the tie-in books, all the writers of all the normal books, trying to get them on board and informed on what's going on. It must have been a logistical nightmare. But forget that. Check this out. Like, this looks like that stuff in Infinity Gauntlet where Thanos is like on that big crazy platform doing stuff. It's funny how similar the books are. I wonder how much this inspired that, not just in the artwork, but in the just wanting to do. I mean, like I said, Secret Wars was first, but I wonder how much this maybe inspired Infinity Gauntlet in any way. I'm not sure, because that's Jim Starlin on writing. I don't know all the particulars of that, but man, all the rubble. Like, this is why I think maybe this series more than any other, even more than maybe Titans, is like why I think of like the George Pérez rubble that you would always see. So originally, they were going to kill Superman, not just Supergirl. It doesn't really make sense to me why they did or they didn't. They changed their mind at some point, but it's like they revamped. Were they going to kill Superman and not relaunch the book? That I don't understand. I don't know. That would have been unbelievable. Years later they will kill Superman, not Marv and George, but Superman will die eventually. But of course that didn't last either. So, like I said, like this book is definitely kind of known for, man, there's a ton of storytelling going on visually in these pages. My goodness, just tons of panels. I can't fathom going through these scripts, not only just trying to figure out who the characters are, but just trying to like clearly tell a story. Unbelievable. So Supergirl sacrifices herself. Super depressing moment for Superman here. And there's an issue, like a tie-in issue, where he takes her body back. I read that recently, actually. But now let's look at the death of Barry Allen. So this, I think Barry Allen like stayed dead until Final Crisis, one of those other crises. I'm not sure exactly. I think that's right. So Darkseid plays an interesting role. He just kind of sits back and doesn't do anything until like the right moment. He's not a very big part of this story until he kind of needs to be. So this is Jerry Ordway on inks. There's a few inkers. I think Dick Giordano and Jerry Ordway and a few others maybe. I can't even fathom inking this. What a nightmare that must have been. what a fun nightmare, I guess. So getting to the actual death of the Flash here. They kind of like planted seeds from this in the beginning, because there's kind of like flashbacks here like to the beginning of the series where he sees Batman and stuff. So this has been coming like since the first issue. And he like dissolves, dies, I don't really know. The Spectre seems to be pretty upset about it though. But I also wanted to show you, so like I said, I didn't read it in this format. I read it in this format. This was the trade from like the late 90s with this amazing cover, like wraparound situation by not just Alex Ross, but this is penciled by George Pérez. Just crazy amount of detail. I think this is like a huge and real, the actual painting and stuff. I'm not sure how big, but boy, it would have to be. It'd have to be pretty big, I imagine. But yeah, so this came out like the late, I think 1998. So this is how I read it. Didn't have to sort through all that newsprint, try to figure this out. This is a good printing. I think there's like a hardcover version of this that's worth a bunch of money. But anyway, to me, it was like a cool introduction to all that stuff I had never read. Kind of like Neapolitan ice cream, where it's like you get a little bit of everything in one package, as opposed to just like a normal comic. I mean, this is literally everything. Literally, this is the entire universe here. So, cool book, huge ramifications for the DC universe for decades. You know, maybe still, you know, they've gone back and like done stuff with the Anti-Monitor, the Monitor, all that stuff, changed stuff, gone back to this stuff over and over again. So like George actually left the Teen Titans to draw this. So he had, climbed to the top of the mountain, creating like the most popular book at DC, and wanted eventually, after like 60 issues of Teen Titans, he said it became too successful and he just wanted to move on to a new challenge. And boy, like what a challenge to go to do this book. But like I said, it's just everything he wanted, so it's awesome. Probably the best DC crossover. Final Crisis is pretty cool at points, but just none of those, like there's like Judgment Day, 0 Hour, all that stuff, Final Crisis, Infinite Crisis, none of that stuff holds this kind of weight in any way. So this is kind of like the gold standard of big company crossovers. And part of their plan after Crisis was to do these two prestige format books that are kind of like a textbook, or like a history, like it's the history of the DC universe. It's kind of like, like those old encyclopedias would be. They used to have like DC encyclopedias every year, but this is, written all this text, and it's a lot, quite a bit of text, and all the images. Same team, so it's Wolfman and Perez. Carl Kessel on inks is interesting. So this is 86. I'm pretty sure it's after the end of Crisis, and it tells the entire like literally the entire history of in text. So not as a comic, but George gets to do these like super cool, like big splash pages of like literally everything. Whereas before, he's like telling a story in comics form, but now he just really gets to shine in almost like a portfolio kind of a thing. I'm kind of surprised they didn't release this as a portfolio. Maybe they just weren't doing those yet, because I'll show you later, like some of the covers that George does for a short run on Batman, that becomes like a portfolio that they release. But like, you would think they would have done like a full-on portfolio release of some of these, main images of the entire, at least like the cherry-pick the amazing ones. So these were released, I guess, as a companion, to the series that kind of shows what they did. Laid it all out in one universe, and then now this kind of makes chronological sense of that new universe that's born at the end. So this one's the good one, where like the second book, if you're going to have one of these, because this is like when it gets to, Superman and Batman, all that good stuff. Come on. So this is like good, good paper, good printing, like the prestige format books back then, going through the entire history of all the old characters. Look at this. This stuff is just... And we'll get to Wonder Woman next. So this also, what's born out of Crisis is the relaunching. So that'll be the beginning of part 2 of these videos. We'll get to Wonder Woman. These images are awesome. So when I think of this stuff, I think of usually like Jose Garcia Lopez, who did the style guide in the 80s. And when I think of like 80s DC, I'm thinking of Jose Garcia Lopez or George Pérez, like the two that, like, they're kind of known in my mind, and probably in most. When I think of 80s DC heroes, those are the images I'm thinking of, mostly because of that style guide, and somewhat because of this book, and because of just Crisis and his covers and stuff like that. I mean, look at this. New God stuff. It's awesome. I don't think he did a ton of New God stuff that I know of. Like because they don't play a big role in Crisis, so you don't see Perez doing New Gods. Maybe some Who's Who stuff. But anyway, oh, that's cool. I like Amethyst. I've been getting some Amethyst comics here and there when I find them in the cheap end. And of course, the Titans. That's a really, I mean, they're literally like most of these images are just like cool, iconic cover looking stuff. Then at the end of this, it literally goes through what happened in Crisis. So this is kind of like a cool, like ends with Wonder Woman as well. It's like a cool addition to, this is not actually in that trade. I don't know if this ever popped up in any of the trades they made of Crisis, but they should have. And then also at the end of this, or around this time, I don't know if it's exactly the end, but George starts doing these amazing wraparounds for Who's Who. So this is 86, so it is around this time. I don't know if he did specific like interiors. There's a Kirby. That's amazing. I'm sure he did some interiors, but the kind of most iconic covers of these Who's Who, though, is Perez. They're kind of known as like these interactive like collage, like, so like they're not just all there, they're like interacting with one another, like characters that would never interact with each other are interacting in these. So that's always pretty cool. And so that kind of wraps up this first video. Thank you for listening. I'm just love Perez's artwork. Glad I could show you a bunch of it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, going through this. So I'll do part 2 next, where we talk about Wonder Woman and Infinity Gauntlet and JLA Avengers. So all that good stuff, the later stuff. I don't have a ton of the later stuff. Like, I don't have any of that cross-gen stuff that Perez did. But we could talk briefly about it. But mostly concentrate on like Wonder Woman and Infinity Gauntlet. That's the stuff that I really dug. Thanks for listening. Like down below if you want to see more of this stuff. But thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in part 2.